Live now on the Sky News Election Channel.
They would deliver bigger deficits and higher taxes, which would hurt jobs and growth. Indeed, Labor has had to admit that they would increase the size of the deficit by $16.5 billion over the forward estimates compared to the position in the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook, and indeed that the position would be $17.6 billion worse over the forward estimates compared with the coalition, which respected economists have said would threaten our AAA credit rating, which would be bad for economy and bad for jobs. And of course, Labor has had to admit that they would impose more than $100 billion in additional taxes, which would be bad for investment, bad for the economy, and bad for jobs. So the choice in this election is very clear. It is a choice between a continuation of a stable, Turnbull government, delivering our national economic plan for jobs and growth, securing our successful transition to a stronger, more diversified economy, or on the other hand, the chaos and dysfunction that would come with a Bill Shorten-led Labor, Green, Independent alliance, which would deliver bigger deficits, higher taxes, weaker growth, fewer jobs, and of course weaker borders. Happy to take questions.
What's been the reliability rating for the savings measures that you introduced yesterday?
We are very confident about the reliability of our costings. They are put together consistent with the requirements in the Charter of Budget Honesty by Treasury and or Finance as appropriate.
But what about the PBO?
Well, unlike the Labor Party, we have actually released our costings. If I can refer you to the relevant web page, electioncostings.gov.au, you will be able to find the public information in relation to the government's costings. What Bill Shorten should do is release the underlying detail of their costings, because of course what has become apparent is that Labor's costings are of a low reliability, and for example when it comes to their tax measures, that they have not that these costings do not include an assessment of relevant economic implications and the like. And what we know is that Labor will deliver bigger deficits. What we know is that Labor will deliver higher taxes, and what we know is that that would be bad for the economy and bad for jobs.
So we'll find full information about the reliability of the welfare costings on that website you just mentioned.
Well, all of the government's costings have been put together consistent with the requirements in the Charter of Budget Honesty, and all of the relevant detail is published on the website that I've just mentioned.
Bill Shorten says he's changed his mind on the same-sex marriage plebiscite. In 2013 he told a Christian lobby group that he had no problem with it. Now he says, well, now I think it's going to be divisive and hateful. If he's changed his mind, do you think that you could?
Our position is very clear. If we're successful on Saturday, we will conduct a plebiscite in relation to the same-sex marriage issue on the other side of the election. That is our commitment, and that is what will happen.
Would you make a Shorten's flip-flop on it?
Well, you know, I let Bill Shorten explain himself. I think that Australians can form their own judgments.
Just 9 months ago, Malcolm Turnbull was violently opposed to a plebiscite. He was bagging it publicly and privately. When Tony Abbott put it forward, he changed his mind to do a deal with the right. Why is Bill Shorten a hypocrite?
Well,
why isn't Malcolm Turnbull a hypocrite?
I think that you're mischaracterising what has happened. Every Australian knows what Malcolm Turnbull's personal view is, but every Australian also knows what the coalition position is, and the coalition position is that should we be successful on Saturday, we will conduct a plebiscite on the other side of the election. Let's just remind ourselves of the history of this issue. This is an issue that has come before the Parliament on a number of occasions. On each occasion, the Parliament has voted to reconfirm the existing definition of marriage. The decision that the coalition has made is that in order to facilitate a more permanent resolution of this issue, that we would put this issue to the Australian people at a plebiscite. Now, this is an issue where there is a diversity of views in the Australian community. There are strongly held views on both sides of this issue. And in a democracy, the most appropriate way to resolve a difference of opinion, the most appropriate way to deal with a diversity of views of this nature is at the ballot box. And under the coalition, that is the opportunity that the Australian people will get.
But Malcolm Turnbull didn't believe that just 12 months ago. He changed his mind. Why he's not a hypocrite, another Bill Shorten.
Well, I mean, firstly, Malcolm Turnbull has explained his position very clearly for some time. Bill Shorten is his rhetoric in relation to this has been bordering on hysterical. The coalition has got great confidence in the Australian people that the Australian people will engage in this process in an appropriate and respectful way. We have great confidence that the Australian people will embrace the opportunity to resolve this issue at a plebiscite, and that is our position. It's a very clear and unequivocal position.
Scott Morrison and Julie Bishop have said that they would respect the outcome of the plebiscite but refused to say how they'd vote if the plebiscite came back in favour of same-sex marriage. Would it be respecting the outcome by abstaining after the plebiscite?
Well, let me just say, I mean, I've answered this question for weeks and weeks and weeks. Everybody knows my personal position, but I will vote consistent with whatever the outcome of the plebiscite would be in relation to this issue, and I will let every one of my colleagues speak for themselves.
Do you think it's consistent with the outcome of the plebiscite to abstain? Do you think that would constitute respecting the plebiscite?
I'm very confident that whatever the outcome at the plebiscite will be respected by the Australian Parliament, will be carried through the Australian Parliament.
Do you have any advice on the situation in Istanbul?
Sorry?
Situation in Istanbul.
Look, you know, obviously, you know, this is just another very shocking report of a terrible event. Obviously, Australian authorities, our consulate in Istanbul and our embassy in Ankara are working with authorities locally to ascertain if any Australians are involved. You know, this is just another shocking example of the current uncertainty around the world.
Just going back to your comments before about Bill Shorten described him as being hysterical on the issue. Given that Malcolm Turnbull, as Phil said before, has also changed his mind, why isn't Malcolm Turnbull being hysterical?
Well, I invite you to look at Bill Shorten's language and how he has reflected on the Australian people's capacity to engage in this process. There's absolutely no comparison between the language of Bill Shorten, which has been bordering on hysterical, and the language by others.
Would you characterise?
The coalition position is very clear. The coalition position is that if we are successful on Saturday, we will be conducting a plebiscite.
Knows the position, but the Prime Minister was pretty spirited in his opposition to this just 12 months ago.
Well,
he only changed his mind to get the leadership.
Phil, you're entitled to your view. You're entitled to your view.
If they are one side's bad and one side's not bad, well, they're both done the same thing.
Our position is very clear. The Prime Minister's position is very clear. Every Australian knows what we would do should we be successful on Saturday, and that is that we will put this issue to a vote by the Australian people at a plebiscite.
You just said that you believed Australians would conduct themselves in a respectful manner in the prosecution of this debate. Would you characterise all the comments made by coalition MPs on this issue as respectful?
You know, this is an issue where there is a diversity of views, and there are strongly held views on both sides of the argument. There is nothing wrong with conducting a debate when there is a diversity of views, which ultimately will lead to a resolution at the ballot box, you know, at a plebiscite. I mean, I'm very comfortable with the way the debate has been conducted in relation to this during this campaign, and I'm very confident about the way this debate will be conducted in the context of a plebiscite.
Can you have strong views as well as respectful views? Can strong views be respectful, or is that a fairly fine line?
If there are no other questions in relation to the economy or other matters.
I do have another question actually about advertising. We've got the TV blackout tonight, but the parties are spending a lot of money on social media. Is social media and advertising just as important nowadays in 2016 as the TV ads?
I think you've asked me similar questions yesterday.
I was asking about the blackout yesterday.
Well,
talking about is social media now just as important or more important than TV advertising we're seeing?
The election is on the 2nd of July. Between now and 6 p.m. on the 2nd of July, the coalition will continue to work hard to earn the trust of a majority of Australians in a majority of seats. We will continue to work hard to maximise our support in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, and we will we will use whatever opportunity we have to communicate with the Australian people about the clear choice in this election, a clear choice between a continuation of a stable Turnbull government implementing our plan for jobs and growth, and on the other hand, the chaos and dysfunction that would come with a Bill Shorten-led Labor Green Independent Alliance, which would deliver bigger deficits, higher taxes, weaker growth, fewer jobs and weaker borders. That is the choice in this election, and we will use every avenue possible to communicate with the Australian people, including at polling booths around Australia, all the way until 6 p.m. on Saturday.
The ACTU...
Labor's tied itself in knots on superannuation in the last few days. From your perspective, if you win the election, the policies as announced in the budget, are they entirely non-negotiable with the backbench industry? Will they be legislated as announced in the budget?
We've been very clear on this consistently during this campaign. Our plan, the plan that we take to this election, is the plan that is in the budget. If we are successful on the 2nd of July, we will implement the measures that are in the budget, including when it comes to superannuation. Labor has been unbelievable in relation to this. I mean, Bill Shorten, Chris Bowen, Tony Burke, they are delivering $16.5 billion in higher deficits after banking revenue and savings from measures that they say they will not support. I mean, they haven't told us what their position is going to be in relation to superannuation, but they've banked the budget improvements. They haven't told us what their position is going to be in relation to the efficiency dividend. Well, they've told us that they would not support the efficiency dividend that has been part of our budget, but that they would bank the savings. So they've banked the savings in relation to the efficiency dividend, the public sector efficiency dividend, $1.9 billion worth of savings. But a day after they released their costings, when they supported our efficiency dividend, they came out and said, no, actually we won't do it that way. We'll tell you after the election how we're going to do it. It's just, these are just more examples of the chaos and dysfunction under Labor. Labor is unravelling this side of the election when it comes to their costings. They are all over the place. They've had to walk away from $40 billion worth of past promises and statements when they were opposing various coalition savings measures. Tony Burke and Chris Bowen like to talk about unlegislated savings measures and their impact and the status and their impact on the budget bottom line. But if you look at what's been happening in this campaign, the value of unlegislated savings that continue to be opposed by Labor has continued to shrink. I mean, if this campaign was going for another week or two, Labor would end up supporting all of our savings measures. I mean, this is the big story of this campaign, is that after Labor rolled over, backflipped on about $40 billion worth of savings measures that they previously opposed, after they've imposed more than $100 billion in additional taxes which would hurt the economy and cost jobs, they are still saying that they would deliver a bigger deficit to the tune of $16.5 billion. Labor doesn't have a plan for the economy. They just have a plan for more unfunded spending, higher taxes and bigger deficits, and all of that is bad for our economy and bad for jobs.
Just one issue back home in WA, there's a suspected car bomb outside a mosque in Perth, and anti-Islamic graffiti also sprayed on that place there. Look, is that a concern, and is that a concern we've got anti-Islamic sentiment that has come to this point?
Well, look, I see that you're reading live news from your phone there. I'm not aware of the events that you're talking about, so I'm not going to comment about things that I don't know about.
The ACTU has said that you're hiding your industrial relations policy. It's 3 days out from the election, more than 1 million Australians have voted, and there's still no response to the Productivity Commission. That'd make their assessment pretty right, wouldn't it?
The ACTU is completely wrong. Obviously this campaign was called on a workplace relations issue. I mean, we clearly set out that should we be successful on the 2nd of July, we would restore the Australian Building and Construction Commission to get rid of the lawlessness and inappropriate behaviour on construction sites around Australia. We've said that we would establish the Registered Organisations Commission in order to ensure that relevant officials from unions but also from employer organisations have to comply with the same standards or similar standards as directors in companies around Australia. So, I mean, we've released policy, and there are a few more days to go. There'll there is more opportunity to release further policy, and you know, I completely reject the proposition of the ACTU.
The Liberal branches in Curtin have passed a resolution condemning the government's super plans. What does that tell you about the resentment among the rank and file of the Liberal Party towards what your government's planning?
Well, our superannuation reforms are designed to make the system fairer, more sustainable, and to ensure that the tax concessions in superannuation help us achieve the actual purpose of superannuation, which is to encourage people to save for their retirement so that they can achieve an income in retirement to replace or supplement the age pension. These are important reforms. These are the reforms that we will implement should we be successful on the 2nd of July, and you know, that is really all there is to it.
Your party has promised more than 88 million in local netball upgrades, tennis courts. Is that an appropriate use of federal funding?
You know, we've in Australia we've had community development grant schemes and stronger region schemes or crime prevention schemes for a very long time, and it absolutely is appropriate for the Australian government to support local communities, to help local communities with their security and to help local communities with their community infrastructure. That is a long established framework in Australia, and it is one that obviously we support.
Especially in marginal seats.
All but a few of those are in coalition seats?
Well, I let you run the commentary. Obviously, in the course of this election, we've made commitments right around Australia, and it'll be a matter for the Australian people to decide you know, whether they support our plan for jobs and growth and the commitments that we've made, which are fully funded within the budget and guaranteed within the budget, or whether they support the alternative, which is the chaos and dysfunction that would come with the Bill Shorten-led Labor-Green Independent Alliance.
Commentary, Senator, that's a statement of fact. These projects are concentrated in marginal coalition-held seats.
Well, you know, we've made commitments in this campaign all throughout Australia, and it'll be up to the Australian people to decide which team they decide to support. Thank you.